Welcome back to the Josiah Henson Leadership Conference. Our next topic for the panel is looking back and moving forward, nurturing Black fathers, sons, and brothers. Our panel today is Clayton Evans, Deputy Director of Arts on the Block, Carson Henry, Executive Director of the YMCA Youth and Family Services, Selina Mindy Singleton, COO of the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, and Gregory Wims, Rotary International Governor 7620. They will all come up and say a few words, but first, we have something we would like to share with you.
As a child in Charles County, Maryland, Josiah Henson saw his family sold away from the plantation and out of his life. He almost died from neglect before he was traded onto the Riley plantation in Montgomery County, where his mother lived. Henson never saw his father or many of his siblings again. He sometimes worked in the stables on Riley's plantation. As a strong, intelligent, and resourceful worker, he fast became one of the owner's most loyal and trusted enslaved laborers. Riley once had Henson lead a group of slaves on a journey to Kentucky through the free state of Ohio without supervision. None of them, not even Henson himself, attempted to run away. While enslaved, Henson converted to Christianity, married, and began saving money to buy his own freedom. But when Riley cheated Henson out of his savings and threatened to sell him, he escaped to freedom in Canada with his wife and children. There, he helped to establish Dawn, Ontario, a settlement for fugitive slaves from the United States. He later dictated his life story to a local writer. The Life of Josiah Henson, formerly a slave, now an inhabitant of Canada, was published in 1849. 3 years later, Harriette Beecher Stowe patterned Uncle Tom's story on Josiah Henson's real life in her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. In Stowe's novel, the slave master kills Tom for refusing to reveal the location of 2 female slaves. Stowe's fictional account of slavery was a blockbuster hit. In reality, Reverend Josiah Henson lived a long and full life, becoming a successful businessman, community leader, international speaker, and a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Impressed by his story, Stowe wrote the preface for the next edition of Henson's book. Henson became known as the original Uncle Tom. His fame spread, and the community of former slaves in Canada grew. On a trip to England to raise funds to help the Dawn settlement, Reverend Josiah Henson was presented to Queen Victoria. Yet, despite Henson's honorable life, Uncle Tom has taken on derogatory meanings through the years. But nothing could be further from the truth. In Harriette Beecher Stowe's fictional novel, Tom was a martyr. The real Uncle Tom, Reverend Josiah Henson, was a Maryland hero.
Our first speaker is Clayton Evans. Clayton is an artist, educator, and father who has committed his career to championing children and enriching communities through the arts. He has collaborated with several nonprofits in Montgomery County and is currently Deputy Director at Arts on the Block. Welcome, Clayton.
Thank you very much. I am very grateful for being here. I thank Mrs. Catherine Leggett, the Montgomery Parks Foundation, Montgomery County Media, my fellow presenters, and the audiences. Thank you. Black boys in green houses. The city warms to your cries, and no one has water to cool the noise. We simply place the blame on the black boys and greenhouses. Your walls branch to many streets. Where do you go, black boys? Grown with grown men's toys and greenhouses. That poem was based on a series. It is based on a series that captures the humanity of a few young men of color who have aspirations, who have or had a father, who are sons, perhaps brothers, and perhaps aspire to be fathers themselves one day. Many of the photographs in this series were captured by the photographer Christopher Barclay, who is my art partner in this Black Boys and Greenhouses series. We are interviewing men of color, ages 13 through 30, to help extend their voices, sharing their aspects of their humanity as one proactive means for reducing the possibility of them being seen as a threat. Of course, for this to truly be effective, we wish to get these images out and the shared thoughts from the interviews of these young men out to as many people as possible, and that is our goal. I am a father, I am a son, I am a brother, who, despite entering the New York City environment that was particularly hostile to men of color during the late 80s, with several race riots, the crack epidemic, I was able to survive New York City. New York City was able to eventually evolve out of a very dark period, but there were always reminders. Always reminders. In 1989, a very brutal assault on a Central Park jogger was the catalyst for the poem that I just read. I was graduating Lafayette College. I did graduate Lafayette College, came back to New York City, and came back to a city that was once again hostile to young men of color. Many of you might know the story of the Central Park Five. Eventually, after serving 6 to 13 years of prison, the charges were dropped, they were acquitted, and the actual perpetrator admitted in jail that he was the sole criminal assault for this case. But the residue of that experience and those reminders that just keep coming back, it's hard to avoid thinking that you might be the next victim of sorts. Yusuf Hawkins, 1989, Rodney King, 1991, Amadou Diallo, 1999, Trayvon Martin, 2012, Michael Brown, 2014, Tamir Rice, 2014, Freddie Gray, 2015, Philandro Castile, 2015, and most recently, well, actually not most recently, unfortunately, but Stephen Clark, Sacramento, California, March 2018, was shot 20 times in his grandparents' backyard. He had a cell phone as his weapon. This is obviously not a complete list of the young men, and there were certainly many women of color who are lost to us before their time. You might have seen in some of the slides a picture of Trayvon Martin. Next to Trayvon Martin was my son, Alan Evans. Alan Evans stands 6'4". He is close to 200 pounds. He has a serious scowl. Only his little sister can make him smile consistently. He loves to wear his hoodie. He's not wearing it these last few days, thank goodness. But I have this fear that he might be the victim of someone who might not see him as a human being. Alan is certainly part of this series, as well as other amazing young men. A greenhouse should be a place to nurture young plants, to give them the right environment to grow and thrive. If left unchecked, if not tended to, or tended to in a wrong way, that sense of nurturing is lost. And the very plants that were once encouraged to grow are now deemed a threat. These young men are not threats. They are human beings with aspirations, and I hope a full life ahead of them. I'm tired of seeing rest in peace murals. They are certainly beautiful dedications to those people who have passed, but they should not be necessary. The series of photographs and paintings called Black Boys in Greenhouses shares aspects of the humanities of living young men of color as preventative measures for parents who love their children and for the young men who have hopes for their promising futures. The photographer, Christopher Barclay, captures images of these young men of color while I ask them a series of questions that range from what comes to your mind when you're thinking of love, to when do you feel you will die and how, to when do you feel most threatened, to what are your hopes for other Black boys. We try to capture the nuances of their expression, of their thoughtfulness in those photographs. I then take the photographs, I also take the audio from those interviews, and then I react to them via paintings. For me, the essential ingredient for nurturing my fellow fathers, brothers, sons of color is through the building of resilience, through education, through loving others, through communication, through leaning forward and sharing your humanity with another. I believe these are all skills that align well with the way that Josiah Henson lived his life. This is how I am trying to help nurture those Black fathers, sons, and brothers as I move forward through this experience with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Clayton. Next, we will hear from Carson Henry. Carson has worked in the youth development field for over 15 years and is currently executive director for the YMCA Youth and Family Services. He is also on the committee for the Montgomery County's My Brother's Keepers initiative and the programming committee for Leadership Montgomery. Welcome, Carson.
I am the grandson of Barbados, Ireland, and Puerto Rico. I am the son of Carl and Linda Henry. I am the husband to Ashley, and I am the father to Emerson James Henry, the newest love of my life. Far too often, the narrative of fatherhood in a Black American family is characterized by absenteeism, neglect, or toxic images of negative masculinity, fear of crying in front of other people. I might change that today, to be honest with you, if I talk. That narrative is utilized to draw attention away from a very common image across our country today. Positive men investing in their community, mentoring young men of color, being friends to each other and supporting each other in their times of need. From stoops on crowded Brooklyn sidewalks to boardrooms to college campuses and ball fields across America, there are black men in our community that are nurturing each other, preventing vicious cycles that have been destroying their community. That story does not often get told. These are ordinary men who do extraordinary things regularly. Today I'm going to tell you a story about one of those men. His story 34 years ago, Carson Emerson Henry Jr. held his son for the first time. That man spent the rest of his life trying to be a good father, a good husband, and a role model to his neighborhood and community. Little did he know that his journey would make him a father figure to an entire neighborhood. I lost my father last Father's Day. Almost exactly 1 year ago to this day, I found myself standing in front of a room of strangers and my closest family members, reminiscing to them about my father and what he meant to me. And I quickly realized that my father had played the role of father to an entire neighborhood of young people. Today I honor my father by reminiscing on the life lessons that I shared at his funeral once again for you, as we celebrate and honor a father who brought so many people to freedom and a new life. So today I'm going to share some of the life lessons that my father taught me through his life, and hope you enjoy them and realize that every day black men in this country are teaching these lessons to each other as we speak. Love your family. I don't know why or how he convinced me to get on a bus with him and go to East New York, but one day he said, "Let's go." I was like, all right. I was a teenager, so I was less than enthused. After we got to the end of that bus ride, we ended up at an old Brooklyn apartment building that looked pretty disheveled. We walked in the building, and I met a gentleman. His name was Alan Henry. I did not realize that was the first time I was meeting my grandfather's brother. We had lived only miles away from each other, and I had never known this man. I started going with my father to my Uncle Alan's house with regularity. We'd sit around this old rickety table as Uncle Alan cooked whatever meal he was bragging about for the day. He'd regale us with his criticism current state of politics. He didn't even know what we were in for a couple years later. My father would talk about sports teams, and I would sit there and wonder what I had to offer this conversation. They'd talk about my grandfather, reminisce about his name being Garvey because he was so outspoken and so very loud, which is a trait I've learned that men named Carson Emerson Henry all have in common. What I wouldn't give to sit at that table again, just one time, with those men. The second life lesson my father taught me was to make and live with their difficult decisions. On September 11, 2001, I woke up in a dorm room in Delaware. I didn't understand what I was watching. I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just some sci-fi TV show. As I walked through the streets of Delaware, I realized that more and more people were talking about the same thing. And the more I heard about it, the more I realized that this was actually happening in New York. And what's worse, it was happening in the building in which my mom worked. Somehow, some way, I kept myself together, found my way to used my cell phone, and tried to call my father frantically. For those of you that experienced 9/11, you know that the phones were down for a very, very long time. I could not get through to my father. I finally was able to connect with my father, and I had never, ever heard him sound the way he sounded that day. That day, two men had to stand and beat each other's rocks because they weren't sure whether they were going to see the woman they loved the most in the world ever again. That was the moment I learned what love truly was. Listening to his voice, understanding what he was saying, hearing the excitement that he felt when he realized that she was okay. I don't even think it was about 2 hours later when I called him back and said, "I'm leaving Delaware. I want to be back with the family. I made a terrible decision. His answer was simple. No, you made your bed, sleep in it. That's my dad. You learn your lessons the hard way, you make your decisions. Some of them are tough, but I think at the end of the day, he knew that I would always be looking back, thinking about the regrets that I might have because I ran away from or ran towards something because I wasn't being strong and standing in and with my decisions. I'm very glad that he encouraged me to stay. My father also taught me about math and spelling. Math, in the sense that, although he took me to the track, OTB, and we gambled quite a bit, apparently I'm a good handicapper. His real life lesson was that the odds are always against you. He didn't say the odds are against you, black man. He just said the odds are against you. Truth for anybody. The reality is, he told me that I needed to be better, smarter, more compassionate, more caring, more honest than anybody else. I had to do everything I possibly could to change those odds. He didn't do it with fear or any kind of malice against the environment in which I was growing up. He did it with love and hope. He did it because his thought was, if he could instill that lesson in me, I would do everything I could to change the odds for other people. And I'd say he taught me spelling, but the truth of the matter is when I used to go to my father and say, hey, Dad, how do you spell this word? He had one of two answers. First one was, go ask your mother. Second one was, we got a dictionary, go use it. Two life lessons to be learned in there. One, either mom was smarter than dad, or two, that you have tools. You have to use your tools. You cannot rely on other people for everything. You have to learn to be self-reliant. And I'm grateful for him for that. Because he didn't give me things. He made me work for things. And finally, the last lesson that my father taught me is that you have to try to be the best person you can possibly be at all times. And in doing that, you will experience pain. And without pain, you cannot experience true joy or good. I learned that lesson through someone else as a reflection of my life to them through my father, which is a very roundabout way to say. I was sitting in Panera one day with one of my mentees, of which I have many. This is a young man whose father is absent, his mother was on drugs, and at the time we had been matched by happenstance to a board member that I had at the Y. I sat with this young man and we talked about things from Plato to Jay-Z to J. Cole and girls, of course. He told me one day while we were sitting at that restaurant that he was glad of his circumstances, that his mother was on crack, because if it wasn't for that, he would never have had the chance to meet me. That was one of the most heart-wrenching things I had ever heard a young person say to me. And when I reflect back on what it means to be a brother, a son, a father, a role model, a black man in America, I think about the two eyes that are always watching you. And for most of us, now that I've experienced this, those eyes are normally eyes that we've created. I have a new routine. I come home every day. After long days of encouraging other people to pick up the mantle and change the odds for each other and themselves, I come home and I think about my wife and my child and how long she was sitting at home waiting for me to be at work, or while I was at work. I pick up my child to give her a break. I bring him upstairs, I put him on the bed, and then I change my clothes into my home attire. And one day I was standing there taking off my tie, and I looked over at the bed, and he was just staring at me. He wasn't crying, he was just watching me change my tie. And I realized that those eyes are going to be watching me for the rest of my life. I realized that there are eyes that have been watching me for my entire life thus far. I realized that I was now standing in the position that my father had stood my entire life. How I learned how to shine shoes, how I learned what a good knot is, how I learned how to treat your wife with respect and dignity. And as I think back to the lessons that I learned from my father and how they tie into Josiah Henson and his memory and what we're doing here today, I realize that the lessons that we learned from the past dictate what we are right now and what our future will become by what we do for the children and families and community members that see us as role models. So it's our job to be here. It's our job to be present where we are. And it's our job to make sure that those eyes that are watching us see nothing but beautiful love, grace, and hope, not only for ourselves and our immediate family, but for our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson. Our next speaker is Selina Mindy Singleton. Selina is an attorney, youth advocate, and COO of the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education. Throughout her career, Selina has contributed to several causes in our community. As a lawyer, she has participated in precedent-setting suits supporting African Americans, immigrants, and minority communities. She also started the STEM Forum on Capitol Hill, encouraging youth involvement in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. Welcome, Selina.
Good morning. I come to you as the proud mother of 2 children, one of whom is a 17-year-old black young man. I was competent to do all the work that was done upon the farm and could run faster and farther, wrestle longer and jump higher than anyone about me. My master and my fellow slaves used to look upon me and speak of me as a wonderfully smart fellow and a prophecy of great things I should do when I became a man. A casual word of this sort, sometimes overheard, would fill me with pride and ambition, which some would think impossible in a Negro slave, degraded, starved, and abused as I was, and had been from my earliest recollection. But the love of superiority is not confined to kings and emperors, and it is a positive fact that pride and ambition were as active in me as probably they ever were in the greatest soldier and statesman. Looking back, those are the words of Josiah Henson: degraded, starved, abused, but proud and ambitious. What you saw and heard about in the first panel is the persistently distorted media and degrading depictions of black fathers, of black sons, of black brothers, depictions that contribute to the tired, negative stereotypes and the unequal opportunity in education, in criminal justice, and more. The image we see is inaccurate. We know it's unethical. We know it's disrespectful. The words and images demonize our fathers, our sons, and our brothers. They fail to demonstrate the full spectrum of black males. Important positive dimensions of our fathers, of our sons, and our brothers are ignored. In reality, our sons are community leaders, they're church ushers, they're advanced placement scholars, they're gold medalist shot put winners, they're national winners of the NAACP AXO Awards, the Academic, Cultural, Technological, and Scientific Olympics. They're members of the Young Diplomats programs. They are members of both the National Honor Society and the National Science Honor Societies. And this is just a short list. And I'm not just reciting this because I'm the proud mother of a son who has some of these attributes. I am talking about many of the young African males in Montgomery County, in Maryland, and in the country. This is the post-millennial generation, known as Generation Z. So how do we nurture our black fathers, our black sons, and our brothers? In this community, we lead with values, we share responsibility. And it is because, as a community, we have nurtured our black sons and supported them that they have excelled. We reward our youth with the African American Festival of Academic Excellence in recognition of their outstanding achievement. We give them church scholarships and other scholarships. Our black fraternities nurture. Omega Psi Phi, the black fraternity founded in 1911 at Howard University, a historically black university, has deep roots in this community. When the Mu chapter of Omega Psi Phi awarded the Scroll of Honor to several of our black sons in recognition of academic achievement, County Executive Ike Leggett was there. Ike Leggett is and has been part of this moving forward journey. Earlier this month, 6 African American college-bound teens, Generation Z, joined the rank of Eagle Scouts. This is the highest award a Boy Scout may earn. Only 1% of African Americans earn this honor. The community of Black fathers and Black brothers and Black sons help them with this journey. This troop, Troop 96, is supported by the People's Community Baptist Church, a large African American church in Silver Spring. And when the Scouts needed to interview an elected official about citizenship in the community, one of the patches that they earn, Council Member Craig Rice was there. Moving forward, a journey moving forward. The Scouts also sought their own fathers as mentors. Rudy Singleton, my husband. Community leaders, Reggie Bridges, who is a small business owner who also heads the Boys' Rites of Passage. And these fathers are and have been part of the moving forward journey. The day of our celebration, it was raining. And as you know, it's been raining here 40 days and 40 nights. So maybe it's about time for it to stop raining. But it was raining, and the rain was raining so hard it was raining sideways. We had on boots up to our hips. And state delegates Janelle Wilkins and Pam Queen were there to celebrate our youth, part of the moving forward journey. I chair the scholarship committee of the Cassandra Butt Scholarship for the Arts, and we award scholarships to the arts. And when I needed help identifying young people and outreaching to deserving youth, I turned to one of my leadership Montgomery brothers, Clayton Evans, to help us figure out how to get youth these scholarships. Another Black father who is part of the moving forward journey. So now it's mid-June, and the Gen Zers have graduated from high school. And so now we're seeking programs and identifying initiatives to encourage and embolden these boys and young men to listen, to ask good questions, to recognize their strengths, to be independent and take ownership of their futures. We not only supported them and nurtured them throughout their high school years, but now they're college bound. So they're going to Morehouse and Hampton University. And we send them to HBCUs because we know how HBCUs nurture our youth. I work at the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, where we represent 105 HBCUs as well as predominantly Black institutions. And so we know the value of our HBCUs. But we also send them to the Ohio State University, where they have the Todd Anthony Bell National Resource Center on the African American male. And many of our young people go to the University of Maryland, where they have the Black Male Initiative. But despite these tired stereotypes, every single time they leave the house, we remind them no smoking, no drinking, no drugs. And of course, they get the eye roll. But they're older now, so they're driving while Black. They are flying while Black to visit colleges and universities and other certificate programs. As members of track teams, they are running while Black, and we know that that's a problem. They are shopping while Black. And so we need to remind them every day what we hope that they need to do. Put your hands on the steering wheel. So there's the talk that we give them. But in the stores, what do we tell them? We tell them go in and shop immediately and come right out. But then you look suspicious if you go in and come out. So we tell them go in slowly. But then they lurk around and they look like Trayvon Martin. So you can't shop quickly, you can't shop slowly. We tell them only hang out with a few of your friends. But you can't do that because it looks like you're in a gang. So just walk around by yourself. But then you're lurking and you look like Trayvon Martin. So what do we tell our young men? We give them these conflicting ideas about what it is that we want them to do so that they can stay safe. I started with the words of Josiah Henson, degraded, starved, and abused, but talking about pride and ambition. I will end with the words of another great man, words penned in a congratulatory letter sent to one of the Eagle Scouts I mentioned. And he says, "This achievement speaks to your role as a young leader in your community. And we hope you take tremendous pride in the hard work and your commitment to service that you brought to this moment. Young people like you give us great hope for the future. That was written by the 44th President of the United States, President Barack Obama.
Yeah, thank you, Selina. Our final speaker is Gregory Wims. Gregory has been volunteering in our community for over 30 years. His accomplishments, accolades, and awards are too long to list. But to give you an idea, he's partnered with over 60 nonprofit organizations. He raised more than $2 million for charity. He started the Victims' Rights Foundation and has received about 100 awards for his work. Currently, he is the governor of Rotary International and producer of Montgomery Matters, a television show here at MCM. Welcome, Gregory.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And as we honor the Reverend Josiah Henson today, my talk will be about how the church, and Granddad and Dad played a role in my life and how that spreads to those 30-some organizations that I've been volunteering with. So I'll first start with my grandfather, who was born in the late 1880s in Clarksburg, Maryland, where the Wims family started. And there's an elementary school there, Wims Elementary School, that is there, which contributes to the Wims family there. He was married, as I said, for some 60-some years and had 9 children. One of those 9 children was my father, Earl Wims. And my dad and mom were married for 65 years before my dad died first, and then my mom went on to heaven. The reason why I mentioned that I came from a family, granddad to dad, where marriage was so important. But not only that, they, in fact, were very much active in the church, like Reverend Henson. I myself, following in that footstep of my grandfather and father, am a lifelong resident of what we now call Goshen United Methodist Church in Gaithersburg, born into that church and still remain there, which is in itself history. But there, I started with ministering to our youth when I was just 13 years old. And I found out very early there that a lot of the youth that didn't have the family unit, the mom and dad together, the boys were very angry. And as we go now, we all know what we see in our schools, etc., that anger is expressed, unfortunately, and sometimes with violence. So I made up my mind then, I say by the grace of God, that when I became 18 and went to Montgomery College, that I would start my own organization to mentor young boys. And of course, I wasn't married, had no children at that time. And with that started a long career of, number one, showing love. Boys, I had no idea who they were, with their backgrounds until we met, but showing that I loved them as an individual and showing them that through me, the grace of God was with them. And then it went on, as I graduated from Montgomery College, I was able to join the board of the Boys and Girls Club, and it's there for 21 years until last year. I came off of that board. I've literally mentored like 200 or 300 boys over that span. And I can tell you now, without a doubt, when we talk about men, fathers, and young boys, that if a boy doesn't have a man in his life, there's a large chunk of his life will be missing, because boys have to relate to other boys and other men. And although I didn't know a lot of those boys while I was at the Boys and Girls Club mentoring, of course, after 21 years, you get to know them all, and I go to the graduations, etc. But it was no doubt in my mind, in the minds of those young people, that it was a difference made from a man. In this case, was me as a man, but I got that from my grandfather and my father. I want to take it a step further, though. As I became my own father, I have 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. It became obvious to me that we had another problem. As a good dad, and quote unquote, I'm not bragging, but as a dad that would spend a lot of times with my boys first, who were born, they ran into problems in the neighborhood because they saw children, other boys, that were angry because they had a dad and they didn't. And both of my sons literally got into several fights all through elementary, through middle school, because their dad was in their lives. But what did I do besides being the strong Christian father mentoring my boys, I said, let me see these boys over the years, because this is over years that are bullying you and talking with you. And I started mentoring those boys. By the time they got to high school, I was their dad also. But the point I'm making is that boys need men in their lives. They also need to know that they are loved, even if someone doesn't know them, that they are loved. Now I want to talk about my daughter, because we talk about boys and men and fathers. What my father taught me, and he taught me from example. My father only went to the 3rd grade. Again, my father was born in 1915, so you know the history. Go back 1880 in Clarksburg. But he never once raised his hand against my mother. And I'm living in the house, and I'm the baby of our family, so I was there all the way to 19 years. And he never cursed at my mother. So that was the first thing that I learned from just observing. But when he talked to me, he said, Greg, I'm going to tell you a life story. One, if you make a commitment to get married, and it's going to be very difficult. There'll be times, and I'm married, thank God, 30 years this year to my wife. So I know there have been difficult times, but you have to hang in there. You have to believe in God, and you have to pray that it will work. So I learned those lessons from him. But when my daughter was born, he said, as granddad, he said, I want you to raise your daughter with the respect that I raised you, and the way I treated your mother, you treat your daughter. You give her that love as a father, because if she, in fact, knows that she's loved, and loved from a man, a strong Christian man, as he said in my life, she will look for the Christian man to marry in her life. It's very simple. My father only went again to the 3rd grade, but it's very simple for him to put things in simple terms. And I would say that from that, at the Boys and Girls Club, I told you I mentored boys, but then I started mentoring girls, showing them that a man could be their mentor, love them without putting their hands on them or without making any type of sexual approach or whatever, because a lot of the girls at the Boys and Girls Clubs that I've worked with had been abused, not all of them, some. So they understood, but they understood from an uncle or a neighbor or a stranger that tried to take advantage of them, that a man can in fact be a man that helped. So as we celebrate today, Reverend Henson, who came out of that strong faith leadership, I would just say simply to you that my life has been mentoring to young boys, young girls, and of course my own children. And I'm proud to say, as I take my seat, I have 2 grandchildren. As it turns out, they're both boys. So they get to see granddad in action. And someone mentioned my 30 years or so of community service. My grandchildren are 13 and 11, and they've already committed to their community of volunteering, helping the seniors with grass cutting, helping open doors, et cetera, and so forth. And so, again, we as men have to mentor not only our children, our grandchildren, but the children we don't know. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you to all our panelists. Before we begin the Q&A, we like to show a short clip from a past Josiah Henson Leadership Conference. At the second installment of the series titled Self-Determination, Collective Responsibility, and Emancipation, we heard from Montgomery County Council member Craig Rice. Craig shared how civil rights struggles were discussed in his family and shared his unique perspective as a member of the movement's forgotten generation. Take a look.
I heard the stories as a young man growing up about the rural South and dealing with race and dealing with the challenges. So I heard it from my grandmother, who I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time with as we visited in the summers. And I think that oftentimes we forget about my generation. We talk so much about the millennial generation. We talk about all the different generations that are out there, but we forget about the one that's just removed. And I think that what you just heard about is so important because we also have a story to tell. Because we were the generation that came about right after the civil rights movement. So we experienced the change that happened, for good and for bad. I remember growing up and being in school when I was in the Magnet program, which was a gifted and talented program. And that was really when I first started to experience racism. Very upfront, to where because I didn't talk like some of the other kids, they called me Oreo, called me Uncle Tom. We were the recipients, our generation, because it was very interesting if we think about it. Our parents were very keen on making sure that we didn't suffer the same sorts of discrimination that they experienced, and were so intentional and so purposeful in terms of making sure that we had every single benefit possible so that we could succeed, that we actually moved so far away from a lot of our culture.
You all did a great job. It was fantastic. What I want to ask you is how we can improve the communication between races.
You know, I think it starts on a grassroots level. I think some things that many of us have in common is if we can sit down at a table and break bread and have some provocative, challenging questions and really explore those, and truthfully share our honest, candid answers to those questions or those thoughts. I think that could be an effective way that we can break down some of the barriers, where we can learn so much more about each other, learn so much more about ourselves, and continue that dialogue.
I think one of the first things that anybody that's not of color really has to understand, or at least acknowledge, before they can truly kind of support people of color, is their privilege. To be perfectly honest with you, our system has not been set up for the African American person in it, and so almost in essence, to be a true ally to a person of color, there's almost a sense of ensuring that other people are receiving the privilege that you receive as you go through your life.
Well, that wraps up our Q&A segment. Sorry. That's all right. So I would like to invite Cheryl Spicer up from Montgomery Parks to discuss what is new with the Josiah Henson Museum.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. I just want to thank MCM for their continued support of our project and our own foundation, which has been really great in helping to spread the awareness into our number one cheerleader who's not with us today, Mrs. Leggett. Just really want to extend our thanks out to all of them and to you for coming out this fourth and fifth time. So what's been happening at this site that we purchased over 12 years ago, this tiny little house on Old Georgetown Road in North Bethesda that was home to a plantation owner, Isaac Riley, but also was home to a most remarkable man that a lot of people don't even know lived there much of his enslaved life, and that's the Reverend Josiah Henson. So we've been really, really busy this past decade. We have conducted extensive ongoing archaeological excavations with over 20,000 artifacts that have been recovered from the site. They're still digging today. In fact, they're digging. We've also been conducting research, and I say loosely because I'm going to introduce you to this powerful sister over here that has been working on research on Reverend Henson to help us produce these phenomenal professional exhibits that are coming to the new museum, but to a new publication that you'll be able to have in your hands very soon. And with that, all of that leads to the culmination of the expanding of this small historic site to this world-class museum and education center. We've just completed our design phase of the project. We're hoping to start construction early winter this year, around November. And with that, that's going to incorporate beautiful exhibits. We've enlisted the work of original artists so that you'll see original art, both indoor exhibits as well as those that are going to be outside. And all of that is because of you. We have been hearing from Mike Nardolilli for a couple of years now about our fundraising for this project, and you all have been helping very much to get us off the ground, to get us going, and we're going to be launching yet another community-based fundraising project. In your seat, you have a flyer that speaks about a commemorative Paver program that we're going to be kicking off this month, where you can follow the legacy of Father Henson in leaving a mark. These commemorative pavers are going to be engraved with a meaningful message and placed all along a path that takes visitors from our parking area in the beautiful Wall Local Park, which is kind of cat-a-corner across the street from the site, and then throughout the site. And with these engravings, you'll be able to share in these memories and leave it in perpetuity at this site. You're going to help to build this site. This is your moment to participate at a variety of levels. So you'll learn more about that when you visit our website. But today it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to one of our Starch co-workers and lovely, lovely, lovely historian who has produced a phenomenal definitive biography of Reverend Henson. It is called Sharp Flashes of Lightning Comes from Black Clouds: The Life of the Reverend Josiah Henson. And with this book, I'm going to let her talk about it, but it is phenomenal. It is, think of it as your biography and textbook together. With this book, we get to see this vision of the man growing up in this enslaved environment here within Montgomery County and Maryland. I can't say any more. It's all on Jamie. So I will turn it over to my colleague, Miss Jamie Coons, who is our senior historian for Montgomery Parks, and then we'll tell you how you can get your copy. Come on down.
Good afternoon. I'm so humbled to follow all the speakers today. You guys are truly inspiring, and I'm so glad the book is technically not done. I still have the time to make a few changes, and I might actually make a couple of changes based on some of the things I heard today. And again, you guys were great, so thank you for having me here today. And this is really the first time I've pitched the book, so I might have a hard time containing myself. I'm really excited to be here. But if you'll let me indulge myself, I wanted to talk about how I was introduced to Josiah Henson. And I think a lot of people are like me. When I went to work on my PhD at the University of Delaware, I had an internship at the Delaware Historical Society, and I was working on a traveling exhibit on the Underground Railroad. And I had never read Uncle Tom's Cabin. It took until me working on a PhD to familiarize myself with that book. And I read the book, and then, of course, I had to read The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin. And if you haven't read The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, that's really where people in the 1800s realized who the model was for Uncle Tom. And Josiah Henson was one of multiple people, but he was almost like a footnote to this major event in American history. And historians like me, we love footnotes. That's where the juice is at. That's when you get a book, you go straight for the footnotes, and that's where you dig around. And I feel very privileged to be in the position to take Henson from the footnote and make him the standalone. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, not only with this book, but with this museum. As many of you might have already visited the museum in Canada, they've been focusing on Josiah Henson for decades. It's our time to catch up. We've been talking about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman here in Maryland. Well, Josiah Henson's on the same parallel. He's the same statue, and his book had a major role in overturning the institution of slavery. And that's really an important story for us to tell at the museum. I actually brought a copy of the book, and again, it's still getting tweaked, but I wanted to read you a quote from the book, and I was so glad to hear folks having quotes from Henson in their talks today. But this is a quote from Henson's book. "Sharp flashes of lightning come from black clouds, sprightly words of wit come from those who live in dark hovels, and bright gleams of intelligence come from children brought up in the most abject ignorance of books." And the reason why I selected that quote to be the title for the book is I really wanted to emphasize Henson's words and his memories. And if you've never read Henson's book, I would encourage you, if you're going to spend money on a book, buy his book. And better yet, you can actually access it for free online through the University of North Carolina. Documenting the American South has 2 editions of his narrative. So if you've never read it, maybe this summer, if you're looking for a good read, go online and read it. But the reason why I picked those words is because we want to give agency to the words and the memories of those enslaved. And many people like Henson did not learn how to read and write. So he dictated his memories and his words. Other people eventually did write down their words. It doesn't matter how it was captured. The important part is that now, here in the 21st century, we can give agency to those words. And we're trying to do that very hard at the museum. And as she mentioned, we've been working on this project off and on for 10 years now. And it really has been my privilege to do research on Henson. I even put in the acknowledgments, he's like a 4th member of my family. I've been researching him so long, my family knows who he is like the back of their hand. But, and you know, Henson's book went through many editions, and I felt like the best way to tell his story was to go through every edition and highlight his timeline, go through every edition and supplement that with other primary sources available from his time period. You know, earlier the panel was talking about media, and Henson really knew how to maximize that, not only in newspaper articles, but just his actual image. And I made a point of including as many images as possible of Henson in the book. We're so fortunate to be in a position to give him agency at this museum and to present his story with accuracy and authenticity, and to fulfill the thematic goals that we identified in the facility plan process, and to allow those that were enslaved to talk about their experience during enslavement. The book also talks about his relationship with the term of Uncle Tom and how he dealt with that before his passing. The book has over 109 illustrations, many of which are from his 1879 edition. And again, many images of himself. And I just want to wrap up in saying that it takes a village to write a book. And many people have helped me. You guys have helped me. Just some of the conversation that occurred today. Visitors have come to the park that have piqued my curiosity, and I'm so thankful for that. And I just want to end, it also takes a village to open a museum. And if you purchase this book, every penny goes to the proceeds of operating the museum. And that's really important. We want to get this museum off the ground so everyone, starting from young children to senior citizens, learn about Josiah Henson, and they learn the value of slave narratives and their role in educating our public about the institution of slavery. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes today's leadership conference. I want to thank our panelists for the information that they've shared with us. I want to thank Montgomery Parks for keeping history alive. If you would like to contribute time or money or both to this project, you can go to montgomeryparks.org if you would like. I encourage you to do so. Lastly, thanks to MCM for hosting this event and providing the live stream. Go to mymcmedia.org to find out more about them. Thanks again. My name is Ed Reed. Have a great day.